Roxo Media House.
Welcome back to FORTitude, everyone. J.W. Wilson, Brenton Payne here with part 2 of Chris Cassidy interview. The first part, if you haven't seen it, don't watch this one first because the first part's as good as the second part, some might say. Welcome back to the show, Chris. Thank you for being back here again. We just finished up part 1. You had decided, or you had become, when accepted into astronaut school at NASA. Starting there, the call, you got the invitation to join NASA after you applied. How did that go down in the family, your life?
Well, it was interesting. I was actually deployed to Afghanistan. Well, let me back up. When NASA has an astronaut class, a call for applications, everybody submits their application. It gets whittled down to about 120 people or so that they bring to Houston for a week-long interview. This is when I was there. The model is slightly different now, but a week-long interview, and they can't do all those weeks at once, and they're broken up. So I got interviewed in September, and the very next week I was deployed to Afghanistan, and the selection office knew that, and they said, okay, well, we'll call you if we need anything. So I did the whole 6 months of my second tour in Afghanistan, kind of anticipating, am I going to hear anything or not? And they don't really give you any feedback, and you really don't know if you're advancing through the process until the little old lady neighbor in our house in Norfolk, Virginia, saw my wife mowing the lawn, and she walked out and said, some guys from the FBI were here asking about Chris. And she told me that, and we both figured out, that's they're doing a background investigation. So at least I'm getting a little more advanced in the process. And so in April, so September all the way till April, and then because they knew I was really hard to get in touch with in Afghanistan, I got an email that said, hey, please call the selection office on Monday at noon. Well, as luck would have it, I was returning to America that weekend, and so Monday at noon I was actually in my house in Houston, in Virginia, and for whatever reason the phone rang there, and I was supposed to call them, and it's one of these deals like Ferris Bueller, you're watching the clock tick and it's going backwards, and like a minute before noon they called our home phone, and I'm like, you get it, no, you get it, okay, I answered it, and the gouge is, if it's the head of HR making the call, you're not going to be an astronaut. If it's the chief astronaut's voice you hear, there's a good chance he's calling to tell you you're going to be an astronaut. And
who told you that? Was that Shepard? Or
it's kind of like once you get in the process, you hear different things, and you just kind of learn stuff. And he said, "Hi, this is Kent Rominger, who was the chief astronaut at the time." And I'm like, "Hey, Chris, we're just wondering if you'd like to come work for us at NASA and cover the phone." I'm like, yes. Oh, yes, sir. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And that started it right away. We put our house on the market. A couple weeks later, moved to Texas, and I've been here since then. That was the summer of 2004.
I assume you're required to retire from the U.S. Navy Department, or no?
That's a bad assumption. So when we pick astronauts, if you're a civilian, you come into the government civil service program, and that's how you get your paycheck. And if you're active duty military like I was, it just becomes your duty station. So a lot of people like you, JW, think that it's a whole separate thing. I just transitioned my duty station to Houston. I remained active duty. My paycheck, my pension kept, building up towards pension.
Oh,
and all
that's
that.
great.
So yeah.
Very nice. So you're now an astronaut. Going through all those things for several years at least. 2008, STS-127, the Space Shuttle Endeavour. How does that call go that you will be flying on operation? And kind of walk us through that if you don't mind.
Can I ask before that, like training-wise? What does that look like? You show up there and you're already in tip-top shape because you're just coming off of Afghanistan, but what's the training like?
Right, exactly. So
no, you're fine.
As I mentioned, the astronaut class comes together, and it's a variety of people. We had military, non-military, pilots, non-pilots, engineers, PhD researchers. We had 3 school teachers, some Japanese astronauts in our class too. So you're this really disparate group of people with different experiences and different strengths and weaknesses. And the job of the initial training is to get everybody from that point to a group of space operators, so you know how to fly the space shuttle and live on the space station. The first 2 years you're an astronaut candidate, and so you're not eligible for a mission. You're just going through, it's like graduate school for space, and you spend half the day in classroom and then the other half of the day in a simulator or flying the T-38, which is a jet trainer aircraft down at Ellington Field in Houston. Then eventually you start getting in the large pool. There's a humongous pool there where we train for spacewalks called the NBL. NBL stands for really giant pool, neutral buoyancy laboratory.
Yeah.
Think of a high school gymnasium with a space station in it filled with water. So really large training facility. And you learn how to operate the spacesuit and use the tools that we use on spacewalks. So all of that is part of it, to include Russian language training, which was by far the hardest part about astronaut training for me was learning to speak Russian. I'm still lousy at it, but it's every week for all that time. And then you graduate from being a candidate. Now you're a full-fledged astronaut. What that really means is you're in line, and you're at the back of the line waiting for your turn to be called. And at some point in the process, a couple years later, so my first launch, I got selected in 2004, summer 2004. My first launch on Endeavour was summer 2009. So there's 5 years. 2 years I was an astronaut candidate. 1 year leading up to 2009 was training with my crew. So there's about a 2-year period in between there where you're supporting other missions, you're working in mission control, you're helping out with whatever jobs are needed, and just kind of getting more savvy and more smart about NASA as a whole, and what does it mean to be a good astronaut. Doing a lot of public outreach and that sort of thing. At some point, though, the chief astronaut, again, the same guy that called me, he calls you into the office and he goes, "Hey, Chris, come see me." And you're thinking, did I park in the wrong spot? Did I do my time card? Am I in trouble?
That pronunciation, that Russian pronunciation.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Right. Did my Russian homework? Did they rat me out for not doing it? But he says, "Hey, we'd like you to be part of the crew of STS-127." And then you get together with your buddies and you start training and preparing. That was my first mission. My second 2 missions were on a Russian Soyuz, which is only a crew of 2, and both of those were cosmonauts. So entirely different training experience, because the shuttle, all 7 of us lived in Houston.
Yeah. And
we woke up, drove to work, did simulators and training, and then went home, and then launched from Florida. And the Russian launches, I would go to Moscow for a month or 2, come home for a month, go there for 6 weeks, come home for 2 months. So a lot of time back and forth with my Russian cosmonaut buddies. And we can. It's an interesting time to talk about that whole Russian dynamic too, and I'd love to talk about it. We'll get to that in a second. But so just completely different experiences between the 2 vehicles and the 2 cultures. But maybe I'll talk about what it's like on that first launch. Even prior to, you're doing all this technical prep, right? Technical prep. Yeah. Then you get the call from the cap, and it's like there's got to be something emotionally in you that's like, I'm going to space. Like that you kind of get away out of your own technical head and say, I'm going to space. I mean, so it's interesting that you say that, because even when I got the call and he told me I was part of the crew, you're excited because you've anticipated this, but you still don't have this I'm going to space feeling yet. At least I didn't. It all, I don't want to say it seems fake, but you're just absorbed in your immediate right now. What do I got to do today? What do I'm preparing for next week? And you're very just task at hand driven, and kind of like a wedding, where it's just really your engagement is sort of just between you and your spouse for a while, and then you send invitations and the cat's out of the bag, and now everybody's excited for you, and everybody's got anticipation of this exciting day. It's the same analogy. You're training, and yourself and you and your family and your crewmates' families are happy, and you have barbecues together and all that. But at some point, you mail out invitations to launch to a whole bunch of friends and family, and then their excitement starts to build. And that's when it started to hit me like, oh, wow, I really am going. And then you get to Florida, we go into quarantine. Like I knew what the word quarantine meant long before you guys did.
Yeah.
You go into quarantine about 10 days before launch. You start it in Houston. 5 or 6 days before launch, you fly from Houston to Florida. And all the launch guests come in about 3 days before launch, and then all of a sudden comes launch day. And I remember on launch morning is the first time I had that feeling that you asked about, like, whoa, I'm really going, because you're packing up your room, you're handing somebody your keys and your passport and your wallet and your cell phone that they lock up in a safe. You gotta, it's this weird feeling that you're leaving the planet and you might not come back.
Yeah.
And that's a conversation that we do have with the psychologist team, and then you got to have it with your family too, and have your affairs in order. I mean, because if just look at the shuttle, it flew 135 times, and twice the crew didn't make it.
But I got to think your SEAL background helped tremendously with that. No?
It does, but you realize that there's variables that you can't control, and what the similarities between both careers is that you train and prepare and stack the deck in your favor of success as much as you. In both cases, we're a group of people trying to accomplish a hazardous mission and do it safely and do it well. And in SEAL training, you train and train and train. And then you go to do a mission, you gather intelligence, you go at nighttime, you use the element of surprise, you do everything you can to stack the deck in your favor. But there's things that you can't control, which are largely driven by the enemy. In space flight, you have that same deep, rich training experience. The engineers really think through all of the what ifs that can happen with the vehicle and the technical systems. But there's some stuff that you don't have control of, and that's the environment, and that's whatever is going to happen that day.
Right. What did you, if you mind us asking, what do you say to your wife, whose name is Peggy? What do you tell her before launch? Is that something you can share? Like if something goes wrong, conversation. Ironically, she couldn't be there on this last launch because she had to leave for COVID. Mm-hmm. So on launch day, we talked on the phone, but. You just say normal stuff. Love you. Okay, I'll talk to you from space. You don't really say, well, what if?
Yeah, what if? That conversation happened 5 months ago, and you talk about it one or two times. You make sure your will's in order, and you kind of tie that up in a bow and leave it there. Yeah.
Okay, then let's talk about Space Shuttle never launch. What does that feel like, if you can put it in?
So our crew has this horrible record that we have the most launch aborts for weather. So we launched on the 6th attempt. So 5 attempts over the course of about 6 weeks. We woke up thinking it was launch day. And I tell kids, like, imagine your mom and dad tell you tomorrow's Christmas. And you're all excited, and you wake up and you're sitting at the top of the stairs waiting for them to say, come on down with the cameras. And you wake up and you're there, and your parents come around the corner and go, it's not going to be today, it's going to be Thursday. And then Thursday come around and go, no, it's going to be 2 weeks from now on Wednesday. And you go, oh, okay. Eventually, after 5 times of that, you really don't believe it's going to be Christmas.
Yeah.
So that happened on 2 of those 5 false attempts. The 6th one really happened, but 2 of those 5, we went through the whole 9 yards, did the whole day, drove out to the pad, buckled in, and the countdown goes all. At 9 minutes before launch is when the final go for launch happens, and they said no go.
Weather related?
Weather, yeah, it was sure weather. And then the other 3 that we didn't get in the vehicle, was a technical problem that we knew. We woke up thinking it was launch day, and at some point in the day they said, no, we got technical problems. So, and the funny part is, Each crew member gets 250 launch guest passes to go to Florida and watch.
Oh man.
And it's so easy to fill 250. You know, you go to you go to the level of Cousins and boom, you're there. By the time we actually launched, there was, I think, 11 or 12 people I had in the stands because everybody else had to go to work and go back to school, and they can't hang out in Florida forever. So it was really, really interesting. But so that day, you wake up. It's about 4 o'clock in your duty day is when launch is scheduled for. It's not 4 o'clock on your watch necessarily, but we adjust our sleep schedule so that it is. So you have plenty of time. You wake up, you maybe exercise, go for a run, whatever to chill your nerves.
Do you sleep the night before?
You do.
By this time, you're like, it's probably not going to happen, so I'm going to...
That's very true. On this one, I was like, I don't believe it. And the weather forecast was iffy anyway, so I slept like a baby probably. You wake up, you do some stuff, you have lunch, and then you go into the suit room and put the suit on, and then you walk out. And you've probably seen pictures of astronauts walking out, waving as they go onto a bus. You're in the orange suit. And that's when the hype starts to build, because there's reporters and people and outside there, cameras snapping away. And you get onto the bus, and we had a pretty funny, jovial crew, a lot of movie quotes and a lot of kind of just fun banter.
The Right Stuff, was it all just astronaut movie?
No. We had Talladega Nights was the big one.
Yeah.
But, so a lot of shut up, Chip.
Yeah.
And so you ride this bus out. It's like a 20-minute ride to the pad. And as you get closer, there's a helicopter overhead. There's police escorts. The roads are all, nobody's on it. Once you go past the viewing stands, now there's nobody out there, and you start to really anticipate the excitement of it. And then you get there, and the doors open, and you get off, and you're just kind of looking up at this vehicle that's on the pad, and energy coming out of it, and steam, and noises, and creaks, and moans. And there's one person standing in the elevator beckoning you to come in and get in, and you ride up to the top, and you crawl in one by one. There is a telephone up there. And you can, depending on where you are, and the first person to load has to go right off the elevator and right in. Everybody else has a second or two to make a phone call. I remember on one of the attempts I called my brother and said, "Hey, here I am getting in," and we both thought that was pretty cool. And you strap in, and you're there for about 2.5 hours actually. For a long time. And astronauts do wear diapers, it's true, and you use it there because you're lying on your back for 2 hours and like you wouldn't have made it. And
they didn't know what happened at break, Chris. Thanks for spoiling it.
And then we got, on this particular day, we got to the T-9 hold, and we'd been looking at gray clouds and whatnot out, so we weren't really sure if it was go or no go. And they said, they go around the room. You're listening to the room in Houston, and they're like, GNC, go. Avionics, go. Weather, go. And we all looked at each other like, oh my God, all right, here we go. Fist bumps. And at 5 minutes before launch, you close and lock your visor. Make sure your gloves are on tight. You really just, at that point, you're just laser focused. All that Talladega Night humor out the door. It's complete game on, switched on, Super Bowl mode. Communication is very crisp, like fuel cell check, main engine engaged, that kind of thing. At T minus 30 seconds, I think, the onboard. So up until then, the computers were controlled through the umbilical cord. Then the onboard navigation takes over, and you see the gauges all kind of switch and move and hone in. At 6 seconds before launch, the main engines ignite, because they're liquid fuel.
Yeah.
So if the reason we do that for 6 seconds is if an engine is unhealthy, you can just rotate a valve and turn the engine off and abort the launch. But the white solid rocket motors on the side are solid fuel. Like you can poke your finger into it like a pencil eraser, it looks like. And so once they ignite that, there's no valve, there's no nothing. You're going. So the health of the engines is assessed for those 6 seconds, and then T-minus 0, everything lights, and off you go. And it's this really, really violent, bumpy ride.
For how long?
So the thrust of the solids lasts for 2 minutes, and those turns out are the most violent nature of the launch. And so the total launch is around 8.5 minutes, 8:45 or so. At the end of 2 minutes, the white solid motors fall off, and then it becomes super smooth and almost so smooth that I couldn't tell that we were moving, because the G forces spike up and the solids fall away, and you go back to lower Gs for a little bit, and then you start picking up the Gs. And I remember thinking to myself, is this normal? I looked at the commander. If he's cool, I'm cool, and he was fine. So it was all good. And the bulk of the thrust in the beginning you're using to get altitude, and then you pitch over, and now you're starting to use the thrust to gain speed. And you launch, obviously, on the coast of Florida. The engine's cut off somewhere on the New England seacoast, and no, a little beyond that. But you're basically paralleling the eastern seaboard, and it's an amazing
How fast and how many Gs are we talking about?
The vehicle monitors itself and throttles back to around 3.5 Gs to protect the equipment and the people, and you ultimately are targeting about 17,500 miles an hour,
which is the speed of the Earth's rotation, roughly.
It's more about at what speed. So what does it mean to be in orbit? That's the real question. Like, if you could freeze the space station at its altitude, which is around 250 miles, 300 miles, varies. It's around 90% of the gravity that we have right here. So you're saying, why isn't it come crashing to Earth? Well, it is coming crashing to Earth, but it's going so fast forward that the Earth is curving underneath it.
Okay.
So the speed that you have to achieve is driven by the altitude that you're going to.
Interesting.
There's
so much physics.
So much going into it. It's hard for me to, that's about my explanation of it.
So when do you get to move freely about the cabin?
So the engine cut off, and for me it was right away, because my job was to take pictures of the external fuel tank. If you remember the Space Shuttle Columbia, it crashed on reentry. The reason it crashed is because on launch, chunks of foam from the tank fell off, and at high velocity, that foam had enough energy to poke a hole in the wing.
Oh.
And so when they lived the whole mission, did the whole mission, they didn't know it, and they came back into Earth, and the plasma from reentry just ripped the wing right off because it got through the heat shield. So we learned from that if we can determine that there's no chunks of foam missing, then you're reasonably sure that you're safe. So my job was to be the guy that takes detailed mapping photographs of the tank right after we separated. Wow. And so I knew this was an important job, and it's a funny story about it, but I had rehearsed in my head, engines off, gloves off, helmet off, camera, unbuckle, pictures. I had over and over in my head, because I'm a new guy, my first job, I don't want to mess it up, because I knew these photos were critically important. And so I just had it out of rote memorization, did exactly what I was supposed to do, and then right about the time I had to change the camera lens, I dropped the camera down, and I'd been looking like through this straw at this orange thing, and now I realized that there's Earth behind it, and that was the first time I saw Earth, and it blew me away, and I realized we were over the Straits of Gibraltar. Basically, we were over Europe. And we're just a half an hour or so into the mission, and
is it emotional? Does it
a little bit? Like holy cow, I'm really here. How special is this? And all this training, all this stuff, I'm here, and we survived launch, and then you go, all right, get back to it.
Yeah.
Okay, this one takes you to the International Space Station. I read that this is the first time in history that 13 people were together in space, and that still is a record. That's pretty cool. You made your first spacewalk, which lasted roughly 6 hours. Would you tell us, apparently there was a CO2 leak in your helmet that caused you to cancel the rest of that particular spacewalk?
Well, the CO2, it wasn't a leak. It was I was so amped up and working so hard that I was producing more CO2. I was producing CO2 at a rate faster than the suit could keep up with it.
Oh, wow.
Did they teach you how to breathe in those things?
Yeah, they talk to you about it and tell you, but it's until you do it, it's hard to understand what pacing yourself is like. Because I didn't feel out of breath at all, but with the amp nature of it, and you're there, and so it was entirely my fault. But I like to joke around with my buddies and say, I can get my stuff done in twice as fast, so it's all good. Yeah, no, but so that mission was wonderful. Our crew did 5 spacewalks. I got to do 3 of them. The other 2 I was involved with in suiting up my friends, and just fantastic 2 weeks. Shuttle missions are 2 weeks long. We went to the space station, delivered and installed components of the space station, but then came home. And the reason there was 13 people there is because there were 6 people on the station, and the shuttle we brought 7. So for that 2-week period, there was 13 folks.
The first time the hatch opens for your initial spacewalk, is there anything you can share that would give us some insight to what you were thinking?
It's an amazing thing, and you're going around the world every 90 minutes. So half of that is the daylight, and half of that is darkness. So you don't really know if it's going to be day or night when you open the hatch. And whoever designed the airlock, they put the hatch on the floor. I wish they had put it in the ceiling or something, because when you open the hatch, you're looking right at Earth, and your Earth brain is still there.
Yeah.
And imagine you went to the tallest building in New York City or something, and you looked out over the edge, and your Earth brain tells you, whoa, back away. This is not safe. Don't be here.
Do you have a heights deal? You don't have a claustrophobia deal?
No, I haven't.
You don't have darkness. Heights?
I don't have a heights thing, but it still visually hits you like, whoa, I could fall.
Yeah.
And you have to, settle into the fact that you can let go of your hands and you're not going to fall. Effectively, your body is going 17,500 miles an hour also with the vehicle that you're next to.
Yeah.
Now, we never take our hands off without being tethered, like a rock climber on a steep face. You're always tethered in some way. And if when you go to time to move, you disconnect a tether that is a short one, and we have this long retractable dog leash type thing that goes with us back and forth. So,
but you feel no pull, right? I mean, there's no feeling like
there's
force.
No feeling of force. The retractable dog leash actually is only force because it has a slight pull, and the reason it does is if you did fall off, it would pull you back to wherever it's hooked to.
Yeah.
But in terms of air resistance or any of that, there's no sensation, just a visual sensation of movement.
Yeah.
You're looking down, you see, oh, there's the Gulf of Mexico. Oh, there's Atlanta. Oh, that must be Washington, D.C. Oh, New York City, Boston. You're gone.
Did you see some of those places that you had been over in Afghanistan? And it some memories and think of and even seeing them at night and lit up and stuff like that?
I think every one of us does that. We love looking at Earth. But what's particularly cool is to look at places that what it looks like on the ground, and you can kind of picture and to have this view from space looking down and knowing the area, and you can, like my town in Maine has a river, but you don't see, it's not like you're looking at Google Maps where there's a border between Massachusetts and New Hampshire and New Hampshire and Maine, and you can tell where the highways are. No, it just looks like this big blob. So you actually have to find my hometown. I would find Cape Cod, easy to see.
Yep.
Count river inlets up from Cape Cod and know that was a river in my town, and that's how I could find it.
Oh, that's cool.
Describe the ISS for us, please.
So the ISS is a total footprint. If you put it on a football field, it would stretch from end to end. But that includes the solar arrays and all the external features that allow it to exist, support life, basically. The living component, I like to describe it as 8 or 9 school buses kind of connected together this way and some sideways and 1 or 2 up and down. So there's plenty of room. A school bus is not very wide, but there's lots of places to be. And in fact, on a given day, when it's particularly on this last mission, when it was just 3 of us there for most of the whole 6 months, we had some visitors, the SpaceX guys, halfway through. But there'd be days where I wouldn't see my crewmates until lunch. There's one gym area, so we all generally bump into each other in the gym throughout the day, taking turns on who's going. The Russian side has a toilet. We have a toilet. The Russian side has sleeping quarters. We have sleeping quarters. They have a kitchen. We have a kitchen. So those basic human functions kind of drive where you spend a lot of your time. But it's International Space Station. You're all over the place going different things. Now, generally speaking, Russian equipment, the cosmonauts maintain and operate. American equipment, we maintain and operate. But we're trained on their stuff, and they're trained on our stuff. But just it would be weird if I went into your garage without asking you and took your hammer.
Yeah.
Same thing. It's just courtesy up there. They'd come in and, hey, can I borrow your whatever? I'm like, yeah, here.
I'm asking for a friend. What's the toilet situation like up there? He's a plumber.
Yeah. So I get asked about going to the bathroom so much.
I saw the kids on that documentary ask you that too.
Well, I decided to make a video of it. It's on YouTube. You can search Chris Cassidy Space Toilet, and it's pretty funny, I think, and go into detail on how it works. And your plumber friend might, because we're actually plumbers too. When we're up there, if it breaks, you fix it, and the toilet is actually, all joking aside, one of the critical items. Because if it's not working, it's all stopped until that thing is fixed. Right? I mean, we have alternate methods. There's bags and stuff, but you don't want to do that for very long. That's a mess. So yeah,
nice. We'll check that out for sure. And then the last comment on the first mission, reentry. Reentry is different from the Soyuz, I think, right?
Yeah. On the shuttle, there's an upstairs and a downstairs, flight deck and mid deck, we call it. And so 4 people sit upstairs, 3 people sit downstairs. On reentry, I was sitting downstairs. On launch, I was upstairs, and then Tom Marshburn and I switched places just for experience. So I couldn't see. There's no windows down there. I couldn't see. But as you come through the atmosphere, the G, you have 0 G, and then the spacecraft starts intersecting the atmosphere, and the G forces start to pick up, and you start to experience the Gs, and you're used to no gravity. So even just a tenth or 0.2 of a G feels like 1 G, like Earth, and it spikes up to 3.5 Gs. So it's pretty intense. And but then the shuttle is effectively a glider. We burn the engine somewhere over the Indian Ocean to target a piece of concrete in Florida, which to me is amazing. And you glide in, and you might have to do some maneuvers if you have too much. It's better to have too much energy than not enough, right? You don't want to land in the Gulf of Mexico if you're trying to get to the coast of Florida. It's better to have to burn off a little energy above the airfield and land. And so we did, and lined up, and because I was downstairs, I couldn't see when we landed, but I could hear the pilot and the commander talking about airspeed and altitude, so I knew we were close, but it was so soft. I couldn't have told you that the main landing gears touched the ground.
It's not like an airplane at all?
No, I mean, it's the same concept, right?
Yeah.
But between pilot skill and the guidance system, it just really smooth. And then we rolled out. You roll down the runway for a while just on the back 2 wheels, and eventually it loses enough momentum, and the main landing gear falls, the nose falls down, and that's when you really can tell, because we're basically sitting right above the nose gear, and boom, and then you roll to a stop and
immediately go into quarantine.
There's no quarantine. I was at Subway getting a sandwich about 4 hours after.
What a celebration!
Yeah, and I remember thinking,
we need to be sponsored by them. That was a nice plug there, Chris.
Yeah, I remember thinking that the people in the store and the person taking my order, they had no idea. I was like, you have no idea.
And even if you told them,
they wouldn't even believe it.
Yeah.
Because you land and you got to do some medical stuff. It's a little bit different on a shuttle because it's only a 2-week-long mission. So as long as you're healthy and feeling fine, that evening you can go be with your family.
You feel heavy? You feel tired? What do you feel like?
You feel, it's better to answer that question after the 6 months. The 2-week mission, I don't know. I didn't feel overly burdened with adaptation process. Within a day or two, I felt kind of normal.
On the second one, you Expedition 35 in 2013,
and then Expedition
62. You're aboard the Soyuz, the Russian rockets.
Yeah.
No longer is there a space shuttle, so we're using other countries' rockets, more or less, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you spent 166 days on this mission, so considerably longer, and made 4 more spacewalks, correct?
Yeah, and so it's probably easier just to kind of talk about both of the 2 long-duration missions at the same time, because they're effectively the same. The one in 2013, I wasn't a new guy, but I wasn't the commander of the space station. But my 2 crewmates were Russian cosmonauts. I did a bunch of time in Russia and launched in Kazakhstan. And then in 2020, I was the experienced guy. I was the commander of the space station. also with 2 Russian cosmonauts. One of those cosmonauts, he was equally as experienced as I was, so either one of us could have been the commander. It was just more of a U.S.'s turn to do it. But jumping ahead to the reentry, since we were just talking about that on the shuttle side, it probably takes a full month after you've been up there for 6 months. It takes a full month, I think, to really get back to totally normal. Mm-hmm. The first week or so, you're not very stable. We're not allowed to drive a car for 2 weeks. You're a little ginger walking down the stairs, kind of.
Yeah.
Washing your hair actually is a violent action because you close your eyes and you're moving your head and you induce all this motion. And and that's really difficult. But if you saw me in the store or the grocery store at week 2, you probably couldn't tell, but I can tell. Mm-hmm. And so another month or so, and you're pretty solid. The recovery in the gym, it's not about lifting a bunch of heavy weights. It's like cones on the court, going back and forth, one stand on one foot, throw a tennis ball against the wall. Yeah, those kind of things to get your balance system all back together.
Yeah. You on the second one, Expedition 35, you took a selfie, which is a point of noting at least, but a selfie of yourself. It became one of the most popular photos in the country or the world that particular year. Was kind of neat, and you can go online and see it real easily. The third expedition, 62 in 2020, which was less than 2 years ago, which is magnificent. But you became the 500th human in space. And a documentary called Among the Stars, which I've watched about your journey, was made. Is this camera guy, is it one of the astronauts? I know it is, but is that his particular role? Is just to film you and everything on board?
Oh, you're looking at the guy. I was the filmer, the sound guy, the producer, the director, and the subject. Because the crew is what it is, and my 2 cosmonaut friends they had their jobs to do during the day, so. All of the footage in that documentary on the space flight, I set up the cameras and took it and redid the take if it didn't capture. Cool. But the 2 years leading up to the launch, there was a professional team, a really, really squared away organization. Mm-hmm. Fullwell 73 was the production team, but they did a great job capturing and telling the story. What I love about it is it tells the team sport nature of spaceflight. It's not about the crew that puts the suit on. There's engineers and mission control folks in multiple countries around the globe all working together to pull this off. And they did a great job of telling that story.
So not only are you there performing space missions and science experiments, you're actually having to film a documentary about yourself. I mean, that's incredible. Just the thought you have to put that on top of all the stuff you're already doing.
Well, the nice thing is you're doing stuff all day long that's interesting, right? And although the documentary is 6 hours, I guess it's 6 1-hour episodes, I don't know what the ratio is of filmed versus what made it and didn't, but it's like an iceberg. Yeah. There's tens and tens, maybe hundreds of hours that don't make it into there. And there was so much that was filmed while I was on board the space station. Some of it really stupid. Some of it 30 minutes of nothing with me floating in right at the end. So they had to sort through all of what would be interesting in the storytelling.
It was really well done.
What would be, if there are any similar? I mean, you've gone to like these deep ends of the ocean and learned all of this kind of, when you did the MIT stuff, like, I mean, you're going down way deep down into the earth and then you're going way above it. So are there any similarities there? Or were there any things that were kind of cool, like parallels between your experiences like deep within the earth and then so far above it?
I guess the fact that deep in the ocean and in space, it's not where we're meant to live. Yeah. So you need gear and you need equipment. And what I learned in both is that you take care of your gear and it takes care of you. And you got to trust your gear and trust the people that are maintaining and helping and building and repairing all of the equipment. And then knowing what to do when something doesn't go right so that you can keep yourself alive and keep your buddy alive. Yeah. And that falls back to training. So I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Sure. Yeah.
One of the psychological things we were wondering is going from space and, like you said, going to Subway earlier. How do you personally feel coming from the space station and all this down to becoming not a regular guy, but living almost a regular existence, going out to eat, sleeping in a bed, normal bed. Is there a kind of a buzzkill, so to speak, maybe the wrong word, but going from that to that, how does one become a regular person after doing what you've done?
Well, I think we strive to remain regular people even when we're there and coming back. I do remember after my first deployment to Afghanistan, coming back, landed at the airport, and that's just that short 15-minute drive from the airport to my house, driving through the streets of Norfolk, and there was Target, and it was nighttime, and there's lights everywhere, and there's restaurants and McDonald's and signs and noises and traffic lights. That was a lot.
Yeah.
It struck me like, wow, I didn't expect it to be weird to pass by a Target, and because you just were so used to austere environment for so long, and so that was different. Coming back from space, I never really had any significant thoughts like that. It was just Earth is your home, and you just want to get back. Mm-hmm. And now that we've had COVID, people can probably appreciate this a little bit more. But when you're on board the space station for 6 months, you're living at work, and it's a cool work.
Yeah.
But you wake up and you're at work, and you do your work and you're there, and you brush your teeth at work, and you go to bed at work. And that's fine for a couple weeks, 3 weeks, or a month. But eventually it gets old. Mm-hmm. And even though you can look out the window and see Earth, and that does help put things in perspective, mm-hmm. it's still mentally fatiguing. Mm-hmm. And so 6 months is a long time. I think the perfect mission length would be 4 months. Mm-hmm. Because it takes a while to get comfortable and feel like you understand, and you can hear, like after a few weeks or a month or so, you can float by something and you hear the noise and you go, oh, that noise isn't right.
Yeah.
Or you see some tool floating and you go, oh, I know where this is supposed to go back, and you just put it back. I forget where I was going with that, but
was it peaceful up there?
Very, particularly at the end of the workday. So that's a good question, actually. I mean, a good lead into that is, what's a typical work week like? So Monday through Fridays are work days. We start at about 7:30 in the morning. We end about 7:30 at night. In that 12-hour period of time is an hour for lunch and a total of about 2 hours for exercise. It takes roughly an hour to do the weightlifting and a half hour on a bike or treadmill, and then they give you a half hour to clean up and cool down.
Is that mandated, the exercise?
It's on the schedule. I mean, you could not do it, and you would be kind of a not so good astronaut if you did that. But nobody's going to shoot you in the head if you don't. But it's for your own best interest, because we've learned over time that, and it's not about being fit and strong. It's about bone health. Mm-hmm. If we did no exercise up there, we'd come back with weak and decayed bones, like a very severe osteoporosis patient. Mm. And we've learned over 20 plus years of people in space that weighted exercise totally mitigates bone decay.
Wow.
So it's really, really important.
Makes sense.
So yeah, in that 12-hour day is exercise and food, and then you're following this schedule of timeline that they put together, and you do all that. Saturdays are generally a half day. We do housekeeping and cleaning, and Sundays are completely day off. And so your question is, is it peaceful up there? During the day, you're busy, you're doing this, you're always worried about, am I behind, or what's the next thing I got to do? Do I got to be on TV next? Mm-hmm. And I have a funny story about that in a second. But in the evening, every night when I was brushing my teeth, I always made a point to do it in the window. And it's all quiet. The lights are turned down. You're done for the day. You're about to turn in, and just sitting there brushing your teeth, watching Earth go by. It was the greatest. That was my most peaceful time every day.
I know we're tight. I got to interject this question.
We're good. Take your time.
So, 2008 to 2020, 12-year span is not a political question at all. Did you see any changes in the Earth, like the way that it looked, from those, it's a 12-year span, lots happened in 12 years on this place.
Yeah.
Could you notice anything from that vantage point?
If you just looked out the window, it might be difficult, but oftentimes the scientists would put together, hey, take a picture of this lake. This is what it looked like on your last mission. Mm-hmm. And there were several bodies of water that were significantly smaller.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that. The other difference that I could see visually, because people often ask, could you tell that it was COVID going down on Earth when you're up there?
Oh, yeah.
And generally, no, because you remember people talk about, the cities aren't populated, so the smog is down, and blah, blah, blah. Couldn't see that from space, at least not with our visual naked eye.
Mm-hmm.
But what you could tell, normal non-COVID times, the airplane contrails going into and out of the major airport hubs on the European side and the North American side, at different times of the day, you see this huge confluence of contrails. In COVID, there was none of it. No airplanes flying. You'd see an occasional one contrail flying across the Atlantic. That was the one thing I could tell difference.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, Chris, you accumulated in your 3 trips to space, 10 spacewalks, 377 days total in space, the 5th most in American history. I mean, that's remarkable. Before we move on from this, and I hate to leave the space because it's so fascinating, you had a TV story you wanted to share real quick? You mentioned the TV.
Oh yeah, this is kind of funny. So you're busy doing stuff, and mostly that stuff is experiments. We're activating experiments for the scientists on the ground, and I'm doing my experiment, and
with beakers and test tubes and stuff,
all kinds of
rats
things.
or something?
That's a whole nother hour topic about what some animals, some are mechanical things, some are with water, some are with fire, some are all different stuff. This particular day, I don't remember what I was doing, but I was looking at my watch, like, I got to be on NASA TV in like 4 minutes, but I'm almost done. Let me just hurry up and finish. And I had to pee really bad, and I had to change my shirt. And so I do it. I finish the experiment, and I go zipping down the module to go to the bathroom. And after a certain amount of time, you know how to turn, you know how to do it, and you float right into the toilet. And I did that on rote memorization. I whip around the corner, and my feet go into the stirrups, and my hand is reaching out to grab the urinal, and all of a sudden this thing goes over my head. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. And I'm like reaching for it, and I move it off my face, and I realize it's soaking wet, and I take it off, and it's men's jogging shorts with the mesh liner completely soaked all over. And my crewmate Luca, who's a really sweaty guy when he exercises, and he's my dear friend, I love him. He had just gotten off the treadmill, and he had changed in the bathroom, and he left his shorts floating in the middle. So I'm trying to pee. I'm trying to deal with this wet thing. I got to change my shirt. In 90 seconds, I got to be on television. I get it all done. I get it off. I'm wiping off my face, and I go out. Hi, I'm astronaut Chris Cassidy, live on the International Space Station.
Yeah, keeping it all together.
Keeping it all together when I'm like about to throw up.
That is fantastic. So inevitably, your time in space comes to an end, and you essentially retire from NASA and from the military, the U.S. Navy SEALs. Mm-hmm. Currently, they're moving kind of back a bit forward quickly, but currently you are the president and CEO of the Medal of Honor Museum, which is currently in construction and set to open in 2024 here in Arlington, Texas.
Yep.
That's what brought you back to the Metroplex, which we're grateful for. That's how you and I connected first. Can we talk about that for briefly? And then we wanted to end with the Medal of Honor and your current situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So last summer when I was winding up my career at NASA, a friend of mine who's on the board of directors at our museum, he called me up and said, would you be interested in working in the nonprofit world and coming to join our project with the Medal of Honor Museum? And I learned more about it, learned where it was, what the mission was, and what the state of construction, or at that point there was no construction, and I just kind of got excited about it, and it seemed like a good fit. What I loved about my time in the military and at NASA, I felt like I was serving the nation. I got to do a lot of cool stuff personally, but really when it boiled down to it, it's serving the nation. Mm-hmm. And that's what I feel I can do here, just outside of the uniform, is serve the nation, build this thing, bring something cool to DFW, but really bring it to the nation. So that's kind of all pretty cool. And
It says the snippet I found is 40 million Americans have served in the armed forces since the Civil War, and 3,511 only have earned the Medal of Honor. So it's a really rarefied air, so to speak, in that regard. So you're dealing with people that have done significantly valuable things in the military.
Exactly, and there's 66 of them living today.
Currently, wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's a passing treasure that we have to help tell their story.
I saw it on the website, which is fantastic. It's mohmuseum.org, correct?
Yep.
They list all the recipients, but the board of directors is a who's who of people. It's U.S. presidents, people like yourself that have done significant things in the world. It's amazing board of directors.
We had a board meeting last week, and I remember just sitting there going, why am I at the head of this table? This is really humbling. Now, the presidents are advisors. They're not on the actual board of directors, but yeah, that we're very blessed to have their support.
Well, we just spent 2 episodes finding out why. You got a lot of reasons why.
Oh, thank you for saying that.
And it's awesome to have you here. And I know that this area getting that Medal of Honor museum was a big catch too. I mean, that was not easy lifting, and I know that everyone who was involved in that, including Judge Whitley and these other folks at the county level, were very enthused about it. And you're going to work with a former K. Granger staffer, Miss Vandergriff.
Yep,
there
absolutely.
as well. So we can't. I mean, just first time meeting you, you're the right guy for the job. So thank you so much for
I appreciate
serving
it,
our
guys.
country and
married
being
to a
into
woman
that.
named Peggy, who you met at NASA. You told us
NASA.
that, and you're dealing with 5 children. Most of them are old enough to be called grown-ups.
Grown-ups, yeah.
5 children, and with all that going on, it's what an incredible existence, man.
Yep,
We're grateful for the time.
Life's good.
We always ask our guests the last question. It's what we do for every guest, but all aside your family and your wife and marital affairs, what is the best day of your whole life?
You said that aside?
Yeah, you can't.
You can't.
No family.
Family. Yeah, because that. Yeah.
Because everybody says wife.
Now,
and
some
kids.
people like Miss Vandergriff's husband still did the family thing. He was just we had Victor on here, and he just went right for it.
We couldn't allow it though. We
you
killed that answer.
killed it. Yeah,
No, just kidding.
No family.
Yeah. I would probably say the moment I opened the hatch on my first spacewalk. Yeah, that was just it brought everything together. All the hard work, all the everything. It was right there at that moment. Yeah.
Well, those that have heard you speak today can appreciate it. So thank you, Chris Cassidy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Captex Bank, for making this all happen.
Yep, and I'm going to give a little shout out to a guy that we lost, a good guy, Ned Barlow, this past week. So this episodes are for him, and thank you again for all of your efforts and everything.
Thanks for being a good dude, Chris.
Thank you,
Chris.
gentlemen. Appreciate it.
FORTitude or